Okay, good afternoon from Southwest Michigan. My name is Josh Haas with the Hawk Migration Association of North America. I'm, of course, joined by Julie Brown, our staff person online, so we're happy to have her as always. And we're excited to be welcoming back Bill Clark to give our presentation today. And I love that Bill's giving talks for us and willing to assist, but not only is he sharing with all of you his knowledge and expertise across the world as it relates to raptor conservation, he's also joined our board. So it's important for everybody to realize there are many ways that you can give back to HMANA, both monetarily or otherwise. So as always, I just want to really impress upon everybody just the great need that HMANA has for support. And please feel free to visit our website at hmana.org/support to learn more ways of becoming a member, join our kettle, or just donating one time if that's all you're looking to do. Or there are also ways to join us in ways of volunteering on a committee or joining the board or doing any number of things to support HMANA and the many migration sites across the U.S. So thank everybody for joining. We're excited to have Bill here today, and I'll turn things over to Julie to provide our speaker introduction. Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at HMANA. And as Josh said, we are excited to have Bill here with us today. I feel like so often when we think about migration, we're kind of focused on this continent, is North and South America. So I'm really excited for Bill to be sharing some of his knowledge, some of his travels and migration patterns from raptors around the world. So Bill Clark is a photographer, author, researcher, and lecturer, and has over 50 years experience working with birds of prey, including 5 years as director of National Wildlife Federation's Raptor Information Center. He has published numerous articles on raptor subjects, has traveled extensively worldwide, studying, observing, and photographing raptors, and regularly led raptor and birding tours and workshops, both home and abroad, with Raptours, which is now being run by his colleague, Sergio Seipke. He has been living in the Rio Grande Valley since 2002. He regularly teaches evening and weekend courses on raptor field identification and biology, and frequently presents lectures on raptor subjects. Bill has written a raptor field guide for Europe, another for Mexico and Central America, and yet another for Africa. He is a co-author of the Photographic Guide to North American Raptors and the completely revised Peterson series guide, Hawks. So whenever you are ready, go right ahead, Bill. Welcome.
Okay, well, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Josh, and greetings, everybody from South Texas. And today I'm going to talk about raptor migration, a worldwide phenomenon. Now, we're all pretty clued into what's going on here in North America, but there's raptor migration going on in the rest of the world too, with different species, as we see here from this Eurasian marsh harrier. Hi, Don. As many as, oh boy, I can't see the top of the name. Many raptors migrate, and most of them form a annual migration. Some of them it's a complete migration, and some of them it's incomplete. Why do raptors and other birds migrate? Now I'm going to skip over some of the first part of this because most of you are pretty much know what's going on. But they migrate because there's not enough food year-round, usually winter scarcity. But there could also be a difference in wet season, dry season differences in food, with dry season having not as much food as wet seasons. I'm going to use as a kind of a guide this book called Raptor Watch, which probably hasn't gotten enough attention. Maybe all of you hawk watchers know about it, done by Keith Bilstein. But it's a directory of the world's raptor migration sites. And it has many maps that show where the migrants are counted, as well as much other information. And this was done primarily by Keith Bilstein, who's now retired from Hawk Mountain and working on vulture conservation. This map shows most of the world's raptor count sites. And you can see there are circles there that indicate by their size and color concentration the number of raptors that are counted. And you can see it pretty much covers most of the world, except for Australia, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So the purpose of this talk then is to get you a worldview of raptor migration. And speaking of worldviews, not only is Hawkwatch International, Migration Association of North America concentrated in North America, but so are we to a great extent. Anyhow, each country in this book has an entry. And with the entry, then, for instance, Algeria, within Algeria, each of the count sites there are listed. And there's a lot of information about what that count site is, the location, and much by biogeographical province, site description, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of information in this book. And most migration occurs in the northern hemisphere just because that's where the land is. If we look at this map, we can see the equator here. Most of the land masses are in the northern hemisphere, with little of them in the southern hemisphere, and in particular in Antarctica, where there are no raptors. Asia has the most raptor migration species compared to North America, it's almost twice as number, with Africa having quite a few, just a few less, but mainly because of the Eurasian species that go into Africa. Another book that I'll look at, that I'll mention a couple of times, is by Ian Newton, The Migration Ecology of Birds. Now, this is one that most hawkwatchers may not be completely familiar with, because although Ian is known to most raptor researchers, he's not necessarily a migration person, but he did write this book, and it's got a lot of good information in it. So on chapter 7 of Newton's book, he's got raptors and other soaring birds and how they migrate, including the Eurasian honey buzzard. So when we look at raptors that migrate, we see that only a few species, as listed here, are completely migratory. That means that the entire population leaves the breeding grounds. And the two here in white are the two species that occur in North America, Mississippi kite and rough-legged hawk. There are many other species where almost all of them leave. Just a few of them remain in the breeding grounds. And in our case, broadwing hawk and Swainson's hawk. More than 150 other raptor species, diurnal raptor species, are partial migrants. That means that the northernmost, because they're northernmost, or in some cases in South America, the southernmost, are the ones that migrate. So the count sites are usually where raptors concentrate on migration. Overall, the raptor migration is broad front, with usually directed north or south, depending on the season and the continent, and not concentrated. But because there are no thermals over water, water can form migration concentration points, and that's the reason they concentrate. There's also a concentration along mountains and foothills where the wind causes the updraft so that the birds can fly in a rising air column without having to use thermals to get height. Now, the Europe gives us a good example of where water barriers, the Mediterranean Sea forming a barrier, such that from Europe into Africa, there are three main entry points. One is at the southern part of Spain into Morocco. The other is through the boot of Italy into Tunisia. And the other is around through the Middle East, through Lebanon and Israel. Most raptors migrate about 30 to 40 miles per hour between thermals, but the overall speed is less because they have to spend time rising in the thermals. And here we can see in this graph what the gliding speed is, and that one, this was in kilometers per hour, and we can see the bigger the mass of the bird, the higher the gliding speed. We look at North America, we see there's a concentration of hawkwatch sites in the northeastern United States and southern Canada, with some spread out across the rest of the country, and one stuck up here in Alaska that I'll talk about later. And of course, the Hawk Migration Association of North America, which sponsors this, was founded so that people who study hawk migration could band together and be a more effective force. Many hawkwatch counts in the western part of North America are manned thanks to Hawkwatch International. So we'll first talk briefly about two famous hawkwatch sites in the eastern United States, Hawk Mountain and Cape May, New Jersey. Now, Hawk Mountain was really the first raptor count set up in Pennsylvania in US in 1930s, and mainly to protect the raptors that are migrating from being shot. And of course, one of the criteria that they had for early on was to count the number of raptors. And so we have counts going back many years since then. And it's a lovely place. And if you've never been there, you must make a journey that's the mecca of hawk watching and watch raptor migration in the fall at Hawk Mountain. Another is at Cape May, New Jersey, where a person no less than Roger Torrey Peterson was hired by the National Audubon Society to instruct the gunners down there of which were the good hawks, that is the ones that were protected, supposedly protected or didn't cause problems, against the bad hawks, like the sharp-shinned hawk, and the Cooper's hawk, which of course is the chicken hawk. Anyhow, Roger did some counts down there earlier, but when we set up the Cape May Bird Observatory, we started way back when we started a count with no less than Pete Dunn conducting the first year counts, the first years. But also I was down there and instrumental in helping to set up the Bird Observatory, but we set up the Raptor Banding Project before the Bird Observatory, and in 1967, and it's run since then. And I think this number may be a little bit low, 150,000 since then. And we published numerous papers on what we banded. First record in New Jersey of Swainson's hawk, second record of common kestrel or Eurasian kestrel in North America. And of course, we catch a few eagles every now and then. It's always great to grab one. This is a juvenile bald eagle. The next one I want to talk about is the Detroit Hawkwatch. And this is a very interesting one. And I had the pleasure of being there a couple of times and seeing the migration through there. And it's kind of interesting because you come right over your head. And some of the raptors seen in North America, we were all familiar with: sharp-shinned, broad-winged, northern harrier, kestrel, turkey vulture, and red-tailed hawk. Some of the counts are in the spring, and two of note are Gunsight Mountain in Alaska and Tubac in southern Arizona that I'll talk about. There are also others like Whitefish Point in Michigan, Straits of Mackinac in Michigan, Braddock Bay, and Derby Hill in New York. Down here in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, we have Benson Park and the Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge. So in Braddock Bay, it gets pretty cold up there, and it's even colder in Whitefish Point. But these counts have been going on for quite a while. The Mackinac Straits Raptor Watch is very interesting, and Nick Aliotto, who's also on the board of HMANA, is doing research on the red-tailed hawks that migrate through there by capturing them and putting GSM transmitters on. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. The next one I want to talk about is Gunsight Mountain in Alaska, and it's up here, right here in the very east central Alaska. And this is our northernmost count site in North America. And it's done in the spring, and there, yes, that is snow. And the whole time I've been up there, the temperature never got above freezing. And you're looking south where the raptors are coming toward you. And this is a highway over here, and this is in a little parking lot off of the highway. That's where the count is done. And the main thing about that that's interesting is the number of Harlan's hawks that go through there. And it's really spectacular to see them because they come in very close. And of course, they show all the variety of Harlan's hawks from the very darkest to the very lightest. And the time I was there, most of the birds were adults. And but we also get rough-legged hawks and golden eagles and lots of other species there. Plus the northern hawk owls are resident there, and you see them hunting. Now, this now a Hawk Watch International count site. The next site is down here in Arizona, where it's much warmer. And between Tucson, that's in the box there, and Nogales on the border, is a little town called Tubac. And there, Peter Collins, who's right here, right here, that's me, set up a count and before 2016 of common blackhawks that pass through there. So there's Peter. And common blackhawk is the most common bird on migration. And you just don't get common blackhawks anywhere else. Here's a photograph taken there of 28 common blackhawks in a thermal. The count is primarily in the morning. And by noon, everything has gone so high they can't count until late in the afternoon. A few settle in, but the count, yeah, is just in the morning. But there's lots of other interesting birds that come through there. Zone-tail hawk, especially. Gray hawk isn't on here. Peregrine harriers, short-tail hawks are breeding nearby, and they pass through. Black vulture and occasionally a Harlan's hawk. Now, raptor migration is also studied with satellite transmitters and GSMs. These are things that have a GPS on them and communicate through cell phone towers. But so in the Western US, this is the Western US, this is California here, and Texas right here. These are tracks of red-tailed hawks that have transmitters on them. And you can see that migration is pretty much north and south. Now, here is a map showing swallowtail kites with satellite transmitters on them. And again, north and south. But you get a lot of information from these studies. There's other studies done with satellite transmitters. This is turkey vultures. 4 different studies here, Hawk Mountain and then central Saskatchewan, and one in California and one in Washington State. And again, the migration is north and south, and you can track the birds back and forth. I'm going to talk now about Texas, where I live. And right here on this one is Hazel Baysmore, just outside of Corpus Christi, not far from where I live. And I can get up there and watch migration every year. And I have every year since I've been here, the 20 years that I've been here. And there's a nice Hawk Watch platform up there where people can watch. And occasionally they get close to 1 million, but usually around 700,000, which is a lot of birds. And anyhow, it's very spectacular. Dane and Libby are the main counters there. They live in Corpus Christi and they keep things going. Early in the season, it's kind of neat up there because you can get Mississippi kites and swallowtail kites on migration. Here are some of the counts from the last 6 years. We didn't reach 1 million, but the average is 500,000 and up to 700,000. Mainly turkey vultures and Mississippi kites and broadwing hawks. But you see a lot of other species involved there. Now, Smith Point is another place in Texas. Now, this is Houston on the East Texas, and Smith Point is down here. And as you can see, this is a peninsula that just tapers to nothing here in Galveston Bay. And the raptors come in there, and of course, they don't want to fly over the water, as we know. And they have a nice hawk tower there. The Gulf Coast Bird Observatory does the hawk count there. And it's really spectacular because the birds are coming low and you're up pretty high and they come right over your heads. And particularly nice to be able to look at the difference between Cooper's hawks and Sharpshin hawks, which are often flying right together. Again, broadwing hawks are the most common. The numbers aren't as spectacular as Hazel Baysmore and just an order of magnitude less, but the closeness of the birds makes it a really nice place. And of course, why do so many hawks occur in Texas? Well, it's because Texas is so big. And you probably didn't realize that the maps you see are not accurate. So damn Yankee land, Minnesota, Mount Annie, Wyoming. Anyhow, the next place I want to talk about is Veracruz in southern Mexico. And that's down the Gulf Coast from Texas. And here, the largest count has happened in the world. And 4 to 7 millions are counted every year. And most of the count is done from the top of a hotel in a little town called Cordell, which is about 7 or 8 kilometers from the coast, from the Gulf Coast. And as you can see, the numbers here are rather spectacular, with millions of birds being counted, primarily turkey vultures, broadwing hawks, and Swainson's hawks. And there's a second count that when I first started down there was done from a scaffolding at a soccer field. Later, they got some money and they built a new building right in this little town called Chichicaxtla. And the lower floor is the office and the bookstore and bathrooms. The middle layer, the middle story is for the hawk watchers, people that come there, and the hawk counters are up at the top. And here are some of the birds that fly through there. And particularly interesting is the flight of hookbill kites, which I'll mention again in a few minutes. Now, Joe Taylor wrote an article about raptor migration down there. And then we go to Belize, where Ryan Phillips and company have set up a hawk watch. This is Belize, this country right here. And this is a hawk watch here right at the southern end, where they found that there is a migration, particularly of hookbill kites. And so that is it's the most numerous bird that they recovered, with 700, realizing that those birds are coming from here, that there's a lot more hookbill kites than we thought there were. And finally, we get down to Panama. And this migration in Panama has been known for quite a few years. Neil Smith, who is a biologist with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, which is here in the old canal zone, wrote about that. He had some very interesting features. He took pictures of birds going over and photographs, and then counted them, and blew it up and counted them by hand. In any case, again, they get more than 1 million raptors count there from Ancon Hill, which overlooks the entrance, the Pacific entrance of the canal. And so there's 1.5 million birds counted in 2021. And so here are hawk watchers gathered at Ancon Hill, watching and counting the migration. And interesting birds that we don't have, such as Plumbeous kite. And the Panama Audubon Society is the sponsor here. Counts are also done from the canopy tower in the canal zone. And they count also spring migration. So if we look at South America, we see there are very few count sites listed in the map. There's Panama, there's one in Colombia, and 4 in Bolivia, and 1 down here in Argentina. And but the birds do migrate, and this is going north along the Andes. And one of the species is a white-throated hawk. And then we have a rufous-thighed kite moving from southern to northern Brazil. And then, of course, many North American migrants that pass into South America come through Panama, then through Colombia, and then head down south, particularly things like the swallowtail kite and to a lesser extent, Mississippi kite. Now, Matias Duhuant, who is from Argentina, originally Slovenian, which is interesting, and had the pleasure of having him here for a week and learned a lot about South American raptors, and particularly their migration, and wrote about their migration. Now, it was in Neotropical Birds. Anyhow, these are the species that he talks about that are down there. And so we can see there are quite a few different species, and of course, most of them are partial migrants. Some of them are migrate just a little bit. most of these are from North America that come into South America. And so here are some of the maps showing that he shows the movement, the broad front movement of the birds. And again, there aren't very many places like we have in North America where there are water barriers that form a place where the numbers can increase. So along the coast itself is a leading line, so that you can see the birds coming through there. And so we get things like the variable buzzard or redback buzzard and black-chested buzzard. And then, of course, we have in the Andes themselves act as a leading line. Okay, and then, so along the coast, again, I got ahead of myself. This is a snail kite and Cinereus harrier are some of the main species that come through there. And in Bolivia, again, the mountains themselves form a raptor migration concentrations, and we get swallowtail kites moving down and local movements of Aplomado falcons. But many other things, bright-winged hawks are there as well. Now, I'll go back to North America and talk a little bit about Swainson's hawks. Now, many years ago in California, a researcher put a couple of satellite transmitters on Swainson's hawks and found out that they were down here in this area called the Pampas. And so he hopped on a plane, he took leave, hopped on a plane to Buenos Aires, rented a car, and drove down to the areas where the satellite transmitter told him his birds were. And he found this farm with a row of trees growing along it, and the birds were roosting there at night. And so he found a landowner who was there, who was very friendly, spoke English, and got friendly with him. And so he was out and looking for his bird, and he noticed that there were a lot of dead birds on the ground. And so he alerted some people. He knew some people in Argentina that put him in touch with people who were looking at environmental contaminants. And they picked up these Swainson's hawks that were dead on there, and they found out they were poisoned by something that were put down for grasshoppers, monochlora, can't even remember the name of it. Anyhow, it's a very bad poison. And so immediately the government the Argentine government stopped the use of that monochloride, and they started a study on that. Well, the word got back up to North America, so everybody studying Swainson's hawks and wondered, are my Swainson's hawks going there where they could get this poison? So they started putting satellite transmitters on it. And this is the result. These are, I don't know how many, dozens and dozens of satellite transmitters of Swainson's hawks, showing them all going right into the same area. And this is where that poison was used. In any case, the upshot of that was that the poisoning stopped very quickly. And once they banned it, they were very effective in limiting its use. And they started using some other not so lethal for the raptors. Anyhow, now Sergio Seipke, who is my colleague, is writing a field guide to the raptors of South America. And this is one of the plates on some of the falcons, falconets and things, the caracaras. The Princeton University Press will publish it. Now we go to Europe. And as we saw in that first map, we have 3 or 4 main ways for the birds to get from north to south and then south to west. And then some up in the northern part, there's a little bit of a concentration because of the Black Sea, because of the North Sea. Okay, so many sites, but I'm only going to talk about a few that I visited. Falsterbo in the northern part of Sweden, which is interesting. And Batumi, a new site on the west side of the Black Sea. and Gibraltar going across from the mouth of the Mediterranean into Morocco, and the Straits of Messina. So in Falsterbo, the count is done right at the tip of southwestern Sweden, where there's a golf course. And on hole 14 of the golf course is where the count is done. And it's kind of interesting. The birds, by the time they get down there, they've really gotten pretty low, and you can actually see them come right across your head. And it's not too far across to some islands in Denmark and then down to Germany. And sometimes they cross and sometimes they turn around and go back. But the species are different. The black kite, common buzzard, and marsh harrier, the first bird I showed you to start with. And so while we were there, we met the hawk counter, and he was answering questions about, do all the raptors of each species migrate at the same time? And the answer was no. And so Niels Schelin, who was doing a PhD, was the hawk counter. And so he looked at the birds and determined what their age was by species. And if he could determine the sex, he determined the sex. And so he asked the question, which comes first, the adults or the juveniles? And there's a picture of Niels. We caught him in a quiet moment so we could take a picture of him. And he had his goat. So in some cases, there's no difference in the timing between the adults and juveniles, the common kestrel, Eurasian kestrel. But in all of these species, the adults come first, honey buzzard, black kite, down to peregrine. And in some of the species, red kite, marsh harrier, goshawk, and sparrowhawk, the juveniles come first. I don't know, we've done that kind of thing in North America. And by sex, all of these species, the females come first, and then the males come first in other species. I think the one thing that I remember from hawk counts here in North America is that with American kestrels, the females migrate first in the autumn. The next place I'm going to talk about is Batumi, and I had the privilege of going there for 10 days and watching the migration. And when you count 1 million birds in a place, you know there's lots of birds going over. And so the main count is done in one place, but the birds are spread out a little bit. And anyhow, it's kind of spectacular. They're not too high, and you get over 1 million. Those 3 years there, and so it's quite a spectacular. Raptors will do a trip there, and anyhow, the one bad thing about there was it's a new count, and it's Eastern Europe. And we got to actually watch a raptor, the honey buzzard, being shot. And the local people are working hard on that, working with the police, working with the tourist board to get that eliminated. And now at the western end of the Mediterranean is the Gibraltar. And actually, we call it the Straits of Gibraltar, but the migration passes a little bit farther west. And in the central part is the boot of Italy, and this is the Straits of Messina. And then in the the eastern part is around the eastern end of the Mediterranean with Lebanon and Israel. So we'll start off with Gibraltar, and these are some of the species that go there, that pass there. Benelli's eagle is usually not thought of as a migrant, but some of them do cross over there. Griffon vultures are very common. And black kite and Eurasian kestrel, Eurasian sparrowhawk and common kestrel are migrants. Two of the migrants in great numbers are the it's booted eagle and short-toed eagle. And let me go back a little bit. And so 2 eagle species make up a lot of the count there. And it's really spectacular. And just north of there is a great big wind farm. And so there was thought to be a real problem with the migrants, but it turns out that the migrants don't go around the wind farm, but it is a problem for the local griffon vultures. The next area I'm talking about is the Straits of Messina, and that's between Sicily and Calabria, the toe of the boot here in Italy. And in Sicily, there was a problem with raptor shooting. Here we can see this is Sicily and this is the Strait in Calabria. and there was a problem shooting honey buzzards. And in fact, this group of conservationists, these are mainly Italians, but there's a few other Europeans in there too that come down, and they're mainly watching out for these shooting blinds where they shoot the honey buzzards. And so they station themselves so they can see if anybody's in these. And if anybody comes into these, and particularly if they have a rifle, they call the police, and the police come and arrest them. And so they have managed to completely eliminate the shooting of the honey buzzards there. But while they're doing all of this too, they also have counters there, so they have a pretty good count there. Anyhow, it was fun to spend time with these dedicated conservationists. And they don't get huge numbers of raptors, but they get a lot of variety there, and they get some interesting species like Amur falcon. And honey buzzard is the most. Now in Israel, now this is the Mediterranean, there's a fall migration count done along the northern part of Italy, just south of the Lebanon border. There's a road that goes all the way from the coast down to the Jordan Valley. And because the raptor migration changes throughout the day, it starts in the morning, right along the Jordan Valley, and as the day goes, the flight moves farther west. And for some species, like lesser spotted eagle and Levant sparrowhawk, probably the vast majority of the total world population crosses this area. And so Levant sparrowhawk and lesser spotted eagle, they cross through Israel twice a year. But because they have about 4 different counts there, so that they can get them all during the day. And Frank Nicoletti, who is famous for his hawk watching at Duluth, was over there one season and just enjoyed it immensely. Anyhow, we get 600,000, 500,000 birds going through there. So it's also quite luminous. So again, lesser spotted eagle and Levant sparrowhawk, the vast majority. Still get a lot of honey buzzards, lesser kestrel, and steppe buzzard passing through. Okay. Something happened to my computer. Pardon me, a glitch. Whoa.
We lost your presentation, Bill.
I know, I don't know what happened.
Hopefully you can
Okay, oh.
try to share your screen again.
Yeah, I'll get it. My PowerPoint turned off. Sorry, everybody.
It's okay. Tech happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Just a little intermission.
Yeah, so speaking of a good opportunity, really, for those that didn't know, we engage with you via the chat session. So please open that chat, and if you have any questions for Bill, please post those in the chat for us, and Julie will facilitate the Q&A at the end. So sorry I was remiss in missing that today for the intro, but please do that. Let us know, Bill, if we can do anything to help.
Okay. Can you see that now, or I got to go back and get shared?
Got to get it shared now. Yep.
Okay, let me get. What?
Well, while Bill is working on that, I can mention that we do have a couple interesting events or tours coming up at HMANA that Bill happens to be leading. So we are going to be leading a meetup, which is kind of like a one-day tour for HMANA, and that's going to be in about a month on March 16th. If anybody is interested or nearby the Arizona area, we're going to be having a meetup at the Tubac Hawk Watch, which is the site, one of the sites he mentioned, that gets really great common black hawk flights. So that's right at the peak migration for that species. So you'd have a chance to spend the day with Bill, do some hawk watching. As he said, it's mostly a morning hawk watch. So people will be gathering there with the counters, and then probably after lunch heading out to do some birding. And that's just a one-day event. And then we also have a tour, a full tour this November. The dates for it, November 7th through the 16th, we're going to Belize and partnering with the Hawk Watch down there. So Bill will be leading that week-long tour with time spent at the Cattle Landing Hawk Watch, and then just birding and hawk watching all over the country, really. And that's going to be during peak flight for hook-billed kites. So that's exciting. And those two tours are going to be up on our website in the next couple days. We're just waiting on some itineraries, some final itineraries. Okay, we've got you back.
Okay, well, sorry about that. A glitch in my computer. And
No problem.
anyhow, I get around. So we're here in northern Israel, and where the flight changes from time to time. And so here is a count of from 10 years. And of course, most of the birds are European honey buzzards and Levant sparrowhawks and lesser spotted eagles. But there's lots of other things here. And you can see the variety that you get here, which is much more than we would get in anywhere in North America, with lots of different species there, including 4 different species of harriers. Anyhow, over 500,000 birds counted on that. And here are some of the birds. I guess we were right here when we left it. And but there's also a count in the spring in Eilat, in the very southern part of Israel, right down here. And these are birds returning to Eurasia, mainly mainly Asia, but anyhow, they're coming through the very southern part. And the count itself is done up in the mountains at about 3,000 feet. This is the Gulf of Aqaba, and Eilat is right behind this mountain, but it's up in the mountains. There's a clear area here. And it's only in the morning because the birds get so high. But again, we get a lot of different species, and we get a lot of big numbers of birds going over. And while I was there, with over 1 million counted, we set up a raptor banding station, of course, because I'd like to capture raptors and band them. And the first year we caught almost 1,000 raptors. And this was down in the kibbutz fields, right at just above the Gulf. We caught things like the marsh harrier and booted eagle. And in fact, I was able to describe the rufous morph of the booted eagle and a dark morph for a marsh harrier. Now in Africa, there aren't very many count sites, just coming and going here at the north and the south end of the Red Sea. And of course, we had the 3 that I talked about earlier in Gibraltar, but within Africa, very few count sites, because there's, again, no concentration. There's no big water bodies there, but there definitely is movement of Eurasian birds in and out. But there's also, there's 2 choke points on the Red Sea. But and on those 2 choke points, here we can see in the autumn, the birds are deflected by the Red Sea coming in at the north and the south end, and again, leaving from Africa and going out through the same 2 choke points. Now within, okay, so in Suez, there are 34 species, which is almost as many species as occur in North America. And in Djibouti and Bab el-Mundab, going into the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, there are 27 species. And counts have been done there, not on a consistent basis, but on an irregular basis by various groups. And this is from Newton's book, and it shows the difference in Suez in the autumn and the spring, and in the autumn at Bab el Mundo. And again, we have a lot of species and pretty big numbers of birds passing through. Now, one of the things that I want to mention about the migration into Africa is this species, the Amur falcon. And they breed in this cross-hatched area up here in Asia. And then they make a pretty long passage into India, and from India overland, and from India over water all the way to the coast, the east coast of Africa. And then they winter down here in southern Africa. And this is the longest distance migrant, and particularly this over ocean segment is particularly long, and it's possible just because of the trade winds. And I've been on the coast of India several times and watched groups of Amur falcons rise up in a thermal and just go completely out of sight because it's so warm there in the autumn that these thermals can go way, way up and get them way up high, and then they just take off. So within Africa, there are wet season, dry season movements. And a French raptor researcher, Jean-Marc Tillet, studied them here in West Africa. And so in the dry season, the birds move south where there's more resources for them. And then when it starts raining, they move back north. And this area is called the Sahel. It's south of the Sahara Desert. And the same thing is happening in southern Africa, although some of these birds that down here in the southern winter, the austral winter, actually can move up quite far north into Africa. But usually they don't leave Africa. And one of these species is a palm-nut vulture, which is not thought of to be a migrant. And we go to Australia, where there are no raptor counts because there's no concentration of them. But yet we know that some species migrate. I've actually been there during the autumn migration and seen Pacific baza and swamp harrier migrating, and gray goshawk. And I want to introduce Stephen Debus, who is a raptor researcher there, particularly studying the two species of eagles, the little eagle and the wedge-tailed eagle. And Stephen has written a book on birds of prey of Australia, which is a field guide. And in there, it does something interesting. He puts two very similar species together, half of the diagram on one side, half on the other. And interestingly enough, the brown goshawk and the colored sparrowhawk are very much similar to the identification problem of Sharpie versus Cooper's. And I'm just amazed at the parallels between them, the split, the head, the tail, etc., between the two. And of course, being over there, I've seen them both, and it does pose a problem. Now I'm going to finish up with talking about Asia, and where there are quite a few migration sites, quite a few places where there's water forming barriers. Where I do that, there are a couple of field guides that have come out recently. This one is in English. It's done by the Asian Raptor Research Study Group, and it's a photographic guide. This one is in Thai. But the pictures have English names for them. And anyhow, so 4 sites I'm going to talk about. One is Beidahai in China, right on the Bay of Bohai, and Powder Hills in Nepal. I haven't been there. Kenting in southern Taiwan, and Khao Din Sor in Thailand on this long Strim Peninsula. Now, many years ago, I went to China, and I went to Beidahai and spent 3 weeks there in October. And from this hill here, called the Lotus Hills, I counted raptor migration in the morning. On 2 days during the 3 weeks, I rented a car and went up here, and this is where the Great Wall of China ends on the east side. And there is a chairlift that takes you up there. And I spent 2 days, took the chairlift up to the top, and then spent 2 days counting there at Shanghai Guan. And so I only counted 3,500 raptors, but it was 25 species. And things that were interesting were Amur falcon, northern hobby, pied harrier, northern goshawk, which now is a different species from our northern goshawk, and Japanese buzzard, and lots of other interesting birds. Anyhow, I published this in Hawk Migration Studies in 1992. Go back and look at my count. And here's the count sheet here. And so I've appended a few of the names of them, like Japanese buzzard now and short-toed snake eagle. And interesting thing was, when I was there one day, I hawk watch from behind me coming up the hills, I could hear somebody thrashing through the woods. And this guy comes up with a great big camera and a pair of binoculars, and he's a German guy, and he's a banker. And he was in China helping with some banking problems. And but he knew about the hawk count over here, and he thought that he was in the right place. And he said, somewhere they've got to be counting hawks. And I said, yeah, I'm counting hawks. And he got up there, and after about 5 minutes, he said, I would like to see such an imperial eagle. And I said, well, I don't think I don't know whether they come here or not. I don't think I've seen one. Hour later, we had an imperial eagle go by. So the guy was prophetic. Anyhow, so the next place is in Tibet, in Tibet, in Nepal. I'm sorry, Nepal, right here in this little square, and this is right along a ridge of the Himalaya mountains, and you're sitting on a ridge top, and the birds come right below, right above you. And in fact, one of the most common migrants is the steppe eagle, which is a aquila eagle, like our golden eagle. In any case, the many species again. And so we have 28 species here, and some of them are pretty fantastic, like Saker falcon, greater spotted eagle, Indian spotted eagle, which is quite rare, and lots of accipiters. So it's in 1,100 steppe eagles in one day, which is quite spectacular. And then we go to Taiwan. And of course, you've all been reading about Taiwan in the news lately. The Chinese are thinking about invading it. Long history there. But I'm going to just talk about birds. And we go to the very southern part, the Kenting National Park. And there was a raptor meeting over there, and they brought me over to talk about raptor catching and what have you. But I spent a week there beforehand trying to figure out a way to catch raptors on the migration. And the migration there is just something very different. So here is the park itself, right down here. It's an interesting park in that there are people living in it. There's a lighthouse, there are farms and everything else, but it's still a park. And so the raptors, when they start off in the morning, they come down here and they catch a thermal down here, and they get up, and then they take off south. And it's 180 kilometers across to, this is Kenting right there. It's 180 kilometers across to the Philippines. There are a few islands in here. And this is the border between Taiwan and the Philippines. This is the Luzon Strait. So they have to get down to here before the end of the day. Okay, but by noon, when the raptors get up and they start taking off, they don't go, they turn around. They start off and then they turn around and they come back. And then they start flapping and they fly north. And, but there's also a spring count in northern Luzon right here, where they did the same thing on the way back. So around noon, they turn around and they come back and they fly north along a low ridge. And it's at the low ridge where there is a hawkwatch platform. And so the people who come to count and to take pictures, especially, or the counters move up there, and the people who take pictures don't come until the afternoon. So they can, from the count, from this down here, see the raptors flying over low, and they're just going back north, and they'll spend the rest of the afternoon and the night there. And then the next morning they'll be off early so that they can make the crossing. And so here's some of the species that are involved. Oh boy. doesn't want to. I'm losing my computer.
Did it lock up again? Oh, it's moving.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. Anyhow, so these are some of the species. And so Chinese goshawk or gray frog hawk, I like to call it, and gray-faced buzzard are the most numerous birds. So we don't get the variety you get in some of these other places. But there are good numbers of them coming, especially these Chinese goshawks. And a couple of other accipiters there, the 3 other species. So it makes a little bit of a tough ID problem there. And the last one I want to talk about is in Thailand, and it's right here on this peninsula in southern Thailand. And there's a raptor center there, the Chumphon Raptor Center, and they're very well, highly organized. People doing a good job, and they have counters. They have 4 count sites that I'll show you where, and they regularly bring in school kids to do the migration. And this was our Raptours group. We met up with a couple of Brits and some Laotians and some Thais. And so it was a lot of fun being there. So anyhow, that was the parking lot here. And so here are the 4 count sites that they have. And they're catching the raptors just because of the topography. You can see from the closeness of the lines here that it's quite mountainous. You can see from there too. And of course, one of the spectacular birds that goes by there is the black baza. And so this is a big flock of black bazas that is just coming by on migration. But there's lots of other species there. Gray-faced buzzard, black-height oriental, Aussie buzzard, and Japanese buzzard, Japanese sparrowhawk, even crested serpent eagle. And some of the bigger eagles too. We had a steppe eagle come by and a few others. And the accipiters, the 4 accipiters, because they're very similar, and so it takes a little skill to separate all of those. And so here we see again only 250,000 in the year, but they're coming very close, and there's usually a flight going on because the weather's pretty standard there, and so lots of different things. There's a species, Brahminy kite, that no one thinks of as being migratory. And of course, they don't count very many of them. They do count a few of them. And so it was a very nice place to watch. Again, black baza is one of the most common birds that come through there. While I was there, they caught a couple of the Japanese sparrowhawks, and they put satellite transmitters on them. And so later on, they sent me where those birds had come from. So again, studying the raptor migration using satellites. So I hope I've given you an idea of the scope and magnitude of raptor migration worldwide. I apologize for the glitches. Things like that do happen, and wonder if you have any questions.
Wow, great. We definitely do. Thank you, Bill. That was a great informative glimpse of world migration. You definitely have my head spinning and thinking of all the places I really want to go. I want to see a black baza. I don't know about anyone else. Those look like amazing birds. And you have me thinking about places we could lead HMANA tours. So some things to think about. We did get some great questions. I know it's already just about 1 o'clock, but hopefully people can hang out a few more minutes and listen to some answers from Bill. Let's see, we got a question from Anne, who said, I recently read about the impacts of lead poisoning from hunting and fishing bait, and again, DDT having a detrimental impact on bald eagle eggs. With the eggs cracking during the incubation period. Can you provide any comments or suggestions on addressing this issue?
Well, DDT is a thing of the past. There certainly could be something else that comes. We have some residual DDT problems with off the coast of California, where off the coast of Los Angeles, where some was dumped in the ocean. And so there's a local problem there, but it's not really a wide problem. Lead poisoning, on the other hand, is still a problem. And there is an organization headed by several people that is looking to switch over from lead shot to non-lead shot for hunting, and because this is the primary source for lead poisoning, and things like golden eagles and particularly condors. It's the one threat to California condors right now. It's lead poisoning, but there is progress being made.
I know HMANA's Education and Conservation Committee has been very involved in lead poisoning and lead awareness in raptors lately. So Anne's second question here is related to the increase of bird influenza. Reports are stating that there are new strains. How is this impacting raptor populations?
You know, I haven't read much about it. It can have an effect. I don't know that any of the North American raptors, which of course we're most familiar with, are affected by this to a great extent. It certainly is a possibility, but after a while, natural immunities come up, and so sometimes when there's a depression, the population bounces back when birds with natural immunity start breeding. But I just don't have the latest information on that. Not something I follow.
Okay. Daryl has a question from Jack's Mountain. He's wondering, what is the main reason for so few hawk watches in northern South America? Is it interest or funds or sites that are hard to reach, or a combination of all those factors?
Well, there's one site in Colombia, in the Andes, but of course, Colombia has been an unfriendly place for people because of in Iraq, the uprisings. But I think that it's much more peaceful now, so there may be some more counts. And don't we have somebody on the board that has a hawk watch in Colombia? And if we go west, we go east from Colombia, there are no other concentration places. It's just, it's rainforest or woods. So there's no place to concentrate, no place to make it interesting, because we hawk watchers, we have to see numbers. We want to see numbers, and we want to see them close.
I know Esther Vallejo, who's on our board. She runs a Colombian hawk watch site. So feel free, Esther, to add anything to the chat if you want to in regards to that question. I know we also have a new site in Venezuela, which is exciting. And then our next question is from Peter. He was asking, why are honey buzzards targeted specifically by gunners? And then we had Aslan chime in and say that there are a high number of them and juveniles that fly over. And some poachers' opinions may be that juveniles taste better than others. I don't know if you have anything to add to the shooting of honey buzzards, Bill.
Okay, the tradition is in both Calabria and in Sicily. In Calabria, it's primarily in the autumn when they're migrating south. And the juveniles in particular of honey buzzards put on a lot of fat. The adults put on fat too. And so when they shoot them and they eat them, they have a lot of fat, so they taste good. And of course, this is the conservation problem, is stopping them there. And I haven't been in touch with people over there to see how the Calabrians are doing with theirs. But the thing is, it's fun to shoot things like that for those people. And of course, they don't think of the hawks, the raptors, the same way we do. And so that's why it was set up in the springtime on the Sicilian side, which is now stopped.
Okay.
But it's just because they taste good.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a real need for just more raptor education with the public in some of these places. Sandra says, I'm impressed by the efficacy of dealing with the poisons in South America. I think she's talking about with the Swainson's hawks, that response. Is that an exception or the norm?
Well, I think it's an exception. I think that you just had the right people in the right place at the right time with the right contact. And the important thing is here that the Royal Dutch Shell, which is the company that makes monocrotophos, jumped in right away and didn't obfuscate, didn't lie, didn't try to block everything, and immediately stopped production, stopped shipping it, and took responsibility. And I think that's one case of where corporate responsibility was good.
Yeah, imagine that. It
Yes.
probably was, such a successful approach because, there were so many Swainson's hawks, just the sheer number of them. Often if there's, some kind of pesticide issue, we don't often see just that many dead birds. So I'm sure that really helped initiate change.
Yes.
Ajit is wondering about the Amur falcon, that amazing migration that they do. He's wondering how many miles in total their migration is.
Oh boy, I probably have that number, but it's got to be 10,000 miles, something like that. And the interesting thing, and what I forgot to mention on the Amur falcon, is when they return, they don't fly over the ocean. They fly along the coast.
Wow.
But they spread out so much that there really aren't any really concentrations. But just the records of singles and small numbers all around the coast. And I've seen them on the northern coast of India in the springtime coming back.
Okay, well, our next question, if you have time for a few more here.
Sure.
This is kind of a big question from Sandra. What do all these numbers tell us about the overall health of raptor populations worldwide?
I suspect that there are very few lingering raptor problems, but there are some. One of them is the threat to vultures, in particular Africa, where vultures are killed for medicinal and other reasons. And the threat in India, where there is a drug that is used for cattle to make them feel better. It's kind of like an aspirin for cattle, and that's a threat. And lead poisoning is a threat worldwide. Shooting of raptors is mostly gone away in North America, but they're still getting reports of my raptors down here being shot once in a while. So that's not a great problem, and but I can't, and of course, the biggest one is loss of habitat, and particularly for some of the from rainforest birds losing it. Harpy eagle, fortunately, has a very extensive range in the rainforest, and the rainforest is still there, but that's still a problem. But in North America, I think our only problem is California condors.
Okay, I think we just will end with one more question. There's so many great comments and questions coming in, and everybody just really impressed with this presentation. So thank you so much, Bill. The last question I will ask you from Mary. She said she's looking forward to the Tubac Hawk Watch meetup next month. Good. And talking about that site, she said out of the 500 migrating common blackhawks last year, none were of the field guide noted immature plumage. The first birds coming through were in various molt stages with flight feathers and tail feathers of different lengths. And the latter half of migration after mid-month, hawks seem to have uniform flight tails and flight feathers and tail feathers. So with this rudimentary observation of one season, which are the adults, the uniform or the jagged molt?
Both.
Both?
Yep. Yeah, the juveniles may come much later, because there are very few. There are a few that are counted late in the season, but it may be that they stop the count soon enough. But in many species, in some species, let's take the osprey, for example, the juveniles don't return to the breeding ground and they come much later. In other species, the juveniles come later. And so what we're probably looking at is the only birds we're seeing that are adults. And this is the first time I've heard that comment. And when I get there, I'll talk to Peter Collins, who's watching, and get his input on that. It would seem to me that that they probably may initiate molt before they migrate, although it's my thinking would be that they would go through their annual molt once they reach the breeding grounds. But if they initiate it and start it, they can get some molt in before they have to stop molt to breed, because they don't molt heavily while they're breeding. So once that female lays eggs and the male and she's not hunting at all, he's got to hunt for both of them, and later on for the chicks too. There isn't enough energy for them to molt. So it may be their molt strategy is to start early. And of course, then once the chicks are on their own, then they have plenty of time for them to finish molt before they have to migrate in the autumn.
Okay, thank you. As Sharon says in one of her comments, so grateful for all your dedication to the natural world. I definitely agree. We can't thank you enough for speaking with us today, Bill. It's been awesome. And I will hand things over to Josh for some closing comments.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, and especially thank you, Bill. It's a wonderful presentation. It really broadens everybody's view of, getting past just North America. We're doing some amazing things here, but there's some truly amazing things being done outside of just our local continent. So thank you again, and everybody really stay tuned for next month. We're still working out some details and trying to gain what our topic and speaker will be. But with that in mind, again, just to reiterate just the importance of you, our supporters, thank you so much. And please make your way over to HMANA.org, see all the great things that are happening on our website, what all the committees and all the great work that HMANA is doing. If you'd like to join our kettle, become a member, and support us with your monetary donation, please feel free to do that. We can't do things like these great programs without you. So thank you very much, and I wish everybody a good rest of your day. See you in a month. Have a great day.